Inside Story Uganda. Real source of political up.
Nawandika akataba ko embagamba. Timuseta busiya Uganda mulimu ekikolimo. Mulimu kasi. Atudde mu ntebe museta busamanya bamulwanyisa. Nembo ekyo okulabirako. Kampuni ya Coca-Cola yali erowooza nti Pepsi Cola imulabe waayo. Basinga okuvuganya. Kandi bagenda baleeta manager omupya mu East Africa wa Coca-Cola. The man obuzavu nti aba Coca-Cola nasibe batuvuganya naye gye tutalina bwe tebaliyo abe tuvuganya nabo basinga bye banywa ebitali Pepsi Cola. So the man decided how do we infiltrate the market. Nibaleeta ezo zona bafiriji ennene. Fiji ennene came from that man's idea. After finding the Coca-Cola is not the problem. Distribute Coca-Cola everywhere it is needed. Mutwale refrigerators. Kanemba gamba tumukulembeze wa Uganda bwatula mu ntebe intelligence embuli ya kituufu. Bana baganti intelligence eringa bwola bembwa. Bwoba muyizi nolaba embwa nga buli ogiweerera ekomawo mu magulu tegeera ebintu ebi era byengo oba timba. Embwa yangu amangu okumanya engo mu muti ne timba. Ayiria ngekomawo mu magulu teekayo omuyizi ateekayo ofa bamanyi okuyiga tuteekayo buteesi kuba tuba tumaze okutegeera kati olaba embwa nga ekomawo ye titekitinga engo ne timba genda kululwo. Era n'abakulembeze bano boolaba bano bambega tebababuulira why timbega tayinza kwogera timukoddomi we yakulya obubi tasobola bamugobe kiyitawa nakalema nenalweso omulimu gwabwe gwali ku doctoringa report. Museveni zebamuwadde. Museveni ayina enkola enkyamu. The president of the United States ayina okusinkana director wa SAI every day nga bali abo Museveni bwakuyita nga bannalweso batuulamu nga bannakalema batuulamu nga basekretary batuulamu be baloopa olugambo nga bakupanishinga. Kati as a result kati director wa ISA akola ati appointment alabe president it would be automatic. Never yinza okuga nti munoonyeza n'abula even ministers tekalina okuva Museveni n'abula. Kakati abakulembeze tebamanya kubanga olutalo luba lwa munda bewamba bokka luba lwa munda. Naye mbagamba ti Milton Obote yatya nnyo Kakonge. Kakonge yali avudde Buyindi ng'asomye alina masters degree in economics ne bamulonda okubeera secretary general very vibrant. Ne gandi mu kulonda kwa 62 ye Obote yamulimba gwe nga secretary general toba na constituency gwebeera ku headquarters coordinating kubanga tugenda kwegatta ne Mengo tulina ababaka 10 nja kulizya mu 10. When Kakonge went to West Nile, a man of master's degree at that time 62 yasulanga mu nsisira n'abantu. So he earned the admiration of the people cause Obote alimba akalunga kawedde. Obote yalonda aba nomination 10 Kakonge teyalimu including an Indian. Kakonge teyalimu ngati Kakonge yali atya Kakonge. Akati what happened as Ugandans were celebrating independence, Kakonge was the first Ugandan to go into exile in Tanzania. Independence yagiriko nagende Wanyerere namubuuza kiki ti Obote nimbi pote bamugamba nti mukugumu kutega emitego n'okugibuuka gitega bani. The person who solved the problem was Paulo Muwanga. Paulo Muwanga resigned his nomination and handed it over to Kakonge. This is how Kakonge went to parliament. Kyova ffe tubagamba ti okujjako eno gavumenti getasasula agikoledde. This is why Paulo Muwanga became a very powerful man in UPC. To surrender ekifo ekyo ekya parliament noga nkiwadde Kakonge. Paulo Muwanga surrendered his seat Obote gye yali amuwadde That's where Nyerere started respecting Paul Muwanga. Namini namuwa ambassador de France. Muwanga jiyatunda buli kimu nayingira liberation. But as Obote feared Kakonge, bwe yagoba Kakonge eventually naleta Grace Ibingira. It was Grace Ibingira who connived with the Mengo people and other people in government in 66 to top Obote. The man he trusted. He directed his hatred to Kakonge. But the man who tried to topple him in 66 was not Kakonge, was Grace Ibingira. Nti abakulembeze aba Uganda because of poor intelligence. Ndoza Obote yaliana bamugamba tikakonge mubinyo. Leta Grace Ibingira ye yamulyawo. Bwe yaje wo Grace Ibingira naleta obwe waabwe. Felix Onama nga secretary general yakona ivinga na Amini ne bawamba Obote. Naye Amini yamusasula. Amini bwamala kuwamba government naayita abantu bonna abayamba ennyo mu kumuyamba okuwamba Obote n'abayita naye bwe yali afundikira n'abagamba tinjagala okubalaga omuntu asinga obusiru mu Uganda. Onama stand up. Namugamba nti okumanya Onama oli musiru. Obote ne Choni ya muganda Obote yakwata mukazi we ne Felix Onama n'agamba muganda Obote agobe Felix Onama ku minister. Obote n'agaana namugamba oli musiru mukazi w'omwezi. Amagye ga Uganda gali 1308 1306 bakakwa ani abasobola. Felix Onama Minister of Defense sinza mugoba. Nechoni resigned from government in 1964 where he was Minister of Information. In fact, it was Nechoni who grabbed the Minister of Information waliyo jimanyi lyali ddwaliro ly'abayindi n'aligulabinga n'alifuula Minister of Information. Era bagenda nga yongo olaba obutanda mu baayitanga amabaati ako ngolaba lyali ddwaliro n'alifuula Minister of Information. Kakati Amini yamugamba nti bwe Felix Onama okumanya oli musiru. Obote yagaana okugoba mu gavumenti nga bakutte ne mukamuganda Buganda yina asala okuba naye bwe nkugambye okuwamba Obote okkiriza bukkiriza yamutonera embuzi 2 ennume n'endoozi n'amugamba nti genda mu West Nile olunde embuzi. You are stupid. Chobanza politics oyo mumanyi nnyo kubanga I read, I make a research. Kati Obote yagamba Kakungulu nti abavubuka bano ababiri Mayanja Nkanje n'Abu Mayanja bagezi nnyo nti tubatwale Mmengo batuyambeko Mmengo kuba tugenda kwegattana Mmengo kozi abagoba mu national politics. Kakati Abu Mayanja Obote n'amugamba kambuuza omuntu gwe nneesiga kozi nga Obote yayogedde ne Kakungulu. This is how Abu Mayanja was removed from national politics. I take a decision myself. Nze tulina gumbuulira nti gundi no. Kakati umutegedde oyo naye nkugamba nti Obote perceived kingdoms as their enemy, as his enemy. Yakujjawo Bwakabaka bwonna. Why? There is no dictator who wants to share power with strong institutions. This is what I already explained. Nti bw'oba okola mu Uganda etteeka, you must understand nti Uganda si China. We have to share power. We have created several areas of authority. Era when I hear people calling himself a dictator, I laugh at them. There is no dictator who can create several layers of authority. Ti okuva ku kyalo, gombolola, chi, these are layers of authority. District councils. It means if we want to pass anything, you must be persuasive. Salukanti, si sente. Waliwo yisu abantu gye batayinza kukkiriza ne bwoba wa sente. Ngeri suicide bazira ne bagaana. Kati Obote yajjawo Bwakabaka. Naye yabujjawo 66 nga yalowooza nti agenda omuwamba agenda kuva mu Bwakabaka. Idi Amin was not a police. Otegedde kyenkunyonyola. Ugandan leaders fail to know they are your enemies and end up fighting non-enemies. Kuba intelligence ebalimba. Kagano Josanga, Teobote Tageze, Idi Amin. The people who were killing Ugandans during Amin's time had not come from Tanzania. We are not sent by Nyerere here. But Amin was preoccupied by Nyerere and Obote. He thought that the people who were undermining him, we are Obote, he did not miss an opportunity to abuse Nyerere. Yeah, Tanzania okubagana ne Uganda tugende mu ringi fe twekube fembi. Nyerere abakuba mukazi nali muwasiriza. Obote nga our border was fortified. Okuve Masaka suicide. Ngaliwa mu muyambi. Ugenda kutuka ekyotera. Esanje, Esangobe, Emutukula, Balochi. But the people were killing Ugandans and were not being sent by Nyerere. They were his own people. Muzeyi Yosa, Kasimu Obola, no parking, Faruku Minawa. These were not Tanzanians. Eventually, Amin attacked Tanzania. Come to Obote too. Obote spent much of his time talking about Museveni. He was preoccupied by Museveni. Who overthrew him? Paulo Mwanga is the vice president and Minister of Defense. Mwanga was not Museveni's agent. Not at all. Okero Lutwa was not Museveni's agent or Basilio. He spent much of his time on Museveni. When the actual plotters against him was dining with them. Come to Museveni now. Museveni spent much of his time and money on Bobby Wine. But those are creating trouble in his government are not agents of Bobby Wine. His own people. Kekatabo kanga.
Kakati kato yongere wanu tulabe.
Anabu wakaleka.
Iyi?
Chimala.
Okakasa?
Chimala. Chimala. Mwemuli just a single bukulu. You're usually disputable. But that is the essence what I wanted to write. And if the readers don't get actual intelligence, they end up being misled. Ntine Museveni bobuza kakati nkubuza ababba esente ezali donative 19 billion ba Bobi Wine banda ababba radio za Museveni ba Bobi Wine ababba egali za Museveni ba Bobi Wine ba Bobi Wine
nedda
ababba milioni ebikumi ebina eza dola ezali za masanyalaze ba Bobi Wine mugana amateeka agalidwa koniyani ababba sente z'eddwaliro kuliko wa Bobi Wine. But you spend no sasula sente bakusasira bani targeting Bobi Wine. No, the enemies are in your house, in your palace. Bobi Wine see akubasiri. This is the state of curse. Until our leaders realize, get to know the real problems and who are behind the real problems. Kati muline teka temuli wa Bobi Wine. Amateka gonna temuli ya basente wa Bobi Wine. But when they talk as if Bobi Wine is a problem. Bobi Wine is not a problem. In fact, mu Uganda mwesiimi. Why? Abantu ba Uganda beesiimi nti aba byeboogera ebyobusiru nenge ebyobusiru nga bantu babitegeera. DPP yagambye President yagambye nti abataka gezimba manyi naye tebakwate. DPP nengalabiye neyesimba mu maaso ga president naga nti tetusobola bajjayo kuba tulina extraditional treaty. How many people have been charged in absentia? Tolyanga ko bantu bebafunanye nga tebaliwo. Abadde president wa gundi wane Burkina Faso Kampala bamuvunanye okutta Sankara mu absentia is in exile. Nengalabiye. Two, even if you don't charge this person in absentia, what efforts should you do to collect him here? Bamuseveni bamusalira amagezi when he looked at the way Kagezi died, I was explaining in the morning, Kagezi okufa kwe kwava ku Kawesa yajja sente Mombasa mu Al-Qaeda asimulula abasibe yagenda n'omusibe because Kawesa left a recorded detail. Abasajja ne bamugamba tizaffe sezirika eza Al-Qaeda is a non-state actor. Yo teyina embassy ekwasa bwasa. Bw'osoma international relations, the interaction of state and non-state actors in the international arena. In non-state actor teyina embassy ye kwabya. Yes, katika Wesa $7 million $6 sajja nazimu akuli Al-Qaeda Mombasa genda obajje bagamba Kagezi n'agaana bali bamuwako $6 million n'agaana. This case has received international attention and the president is interested in it. Nayagala okufuna security protection bambodde bagenda munda. She failed. Ebola security, she failed. That's why by the time she was attacked, was moving on Kameme, was in front of Akulu. But when her killers fired, did Akulu's escorts fire back? Did Akulu's escorts fire back? Immediately after her murder, assassination, Kabushenga in his newspaper launched a fund to help Kagezi's children. How? When Makerere main building was gutted by fire, Kabushenga carried a story, a new vision. Chinese to construct. What was needed was construction to divert attention. What was important was the police to find the arsonists. Era nabagamba tibajja kuucha amasomero magamalewo bajja kuucha buli kimba ikali bagambi ti office ya gundi ya chief justice bajogeza. How come ngandi mbega lwaki police bojjaji yawunye mukuba oba yabadde mumwete yabadde ki enkyere balumbono lwaki mpokoto eyeyita omukala mujja yalumba faamu ya guti owa koti maaso n'alumba neyo y'omukazi DPP. What do they share in common? What do they share in common? Is justice. People seeing the government is changing. People seeing you will see elimination murders with people who have evidence. You see the survival of Katumba helped us. To be in the process, many people a setback is good. Abati mubabat ne coming of magambo president ne nyota yekikuza nachi kakati omukazi otayinza kugamba naye basalya Museveni amagezi nti unali mu interpol hakula ali mu interpol ate interpol ende muno neti interpol najja yoti oyo omusajja kubanga even mentioning him nga president beyaga ndi mention him abantu bamutegeere ti yatakagezi DPP tasobola. But DPP is also targetable. You must ensure nti abatta muno ino bakwata. Era kyobula bano baganti okuva lebayo kya masiro ge Kasubi ne kubula bogo bakotte buli somero lyo bwekya twaligwa mu kwata. Kubanga babalema luli when a criminal is not apprehended na bagamba nti Rwanda government ina the longo arm of the Rwanda's government catches up with you. By none Gubarisi, Yetaba. But the government of Uganda has the short arm. Criminals go Scotty Field, even where is guerrilling evidence. Kakati no jiteka nti okitunuye no kiraba nti president chayo get the kitufu nti wachi muvunane mu absentia abantu bategere nti na yatakagezi ate era nze ngenda n'enjogera ebintu kati genda okuze bagemeire
oba muvunanire erigi yaddukira
Gifford eyatta omuntu eyattawa justice alemera mu ggwanga ki talina bwalemerayo naye bano bakimanyi nti bwadda era kyobulaba obw'obuzaafa bwakubye kayihula as men on the run bakidaivatinga nedda if these were kayihula as men bring them to implicate kayihula
awuliriza nti osobola bulungi nnyo okufuna essimu ejja mu nsawo yo okuva mu MTN nga ogenda mu maduuka gaabwe gonna oba mu maduuka ga M-Kopa wonna mu Uganda. Sasula 1,400 buli lunaku, siringi 1,400 buli lunaku okumala emyezi 12. Essimu zino ozisasulira ku kibanja mpola. Essimu eno erina kamera ekuba ekifaananyi ekisufu, n'olw'ensonga munangawuliriza ate nga essimu ya mulembe osobola bulungi okufuna essimu gye weetaaga ate nga tukaluubiziddwa. N'olw'ensonga eyo genda mu dduuka lya MTN oba edduuka lya M-Kopa osobole okuyambibwa ofune essimu eyo ng'ogisasulira 1,400 buli lunaku. Naye ate si ekyo kyokka, osobola bulungi nnyo n'okujjuzaawo kaakati MTN Uganda ekujjukiza nti mu mbeera yonna eri wamu naawe kaakati osobola okufuna Momo Advance n'ojjuzaawo. Kitegeeza ki? Oyinza okuba olina kyoyagala okusasula. Jjukira ebintu bingi tubisasulira kati ku ssimu. Osasula amazzi, osasula amasannyalaze n'ebirala bingi nnyo. Naye ne weezuula nga ssente z'olina tezikumala, oyagala kusasula 2,200 olinako 15,000. Ky'oba okola genda ku Momo Advance osabe bakuweeyo ku Advance osasule naye n'oluvannyuma ate olyoke ozzeewo ssente zaabwe ng'omaze okufuna ssente ezikumala. Ssente zo teziwera. Kozesa Momo Advance osobole okwefunira kyoyagala mangu ddala bunnambiro. Newe buba kiro nga tolina gagenda wali outlet yonna ng'oli mu nnyumba yo, basobola bulungi nnyo okukuyamba. Oli ku 9:8 njagala okwebaza okubeera nti oli wamu naffe era nga kyenkugamba eddakiika ziri 10 ezakayita ku ssaawa 2. Mukulu Tamale Mirundi tuli naye era yatusuubiza akatabo kano aka State House Cars bwe twali wano mu programu yaffe ey'olwokuna oluwedde. Naye nga yawandiika akatabo kano n'akawa omutwe.
Mulimu ekikolo mukulembeza abairamu mukulembeza wa Uganda anoonya abalabe be abaleka mu State House n'agenda ewala.
N'olw'ensonga eyo akatabo ye muwandiisi Tamale Mirundi. Ekifaananyi ku ngulu yateekako ebifaananyi bya president abaliko president b'eggwanga ne president aliko kati. Ndabako Dr. Milton Obote, ndabako General Tito Lutwa, ndabako Idi Amin, ndabako Yusuf Kirondele, Binayisa, Paulo Mwanga, n'ali mu ntebe we twogerera Yoweri Kaguta Museveni nga president ekiseera kino era nga kuliko n'ekifaananyi kya State House. Kakati akatabo kano yakawa ennyanjula. Ennyanjula yaako egamba bweti gye tutandise nayo. Egamba nti for quite a long time there existed a common belief among the managers of Coca-Cola against manufacturer of soft drinks that their arch-rival in the market was Pepsi-Cola. It was until Coca-Cola appointed a new manager from the East African region that this belief was disproved. The new manager sat down to draw a new marketing strategy for the company only to find out that the centuries-old belief was untrue. This phenomenon is not so strange. Across the world, people fail to understand their real enemies, but spend most of their lives in an illusion of perceived enemies. The findings in the new manager's report were both intriguing and amazing. The findings revealed that Pepsi-Cola was not the biggest supplier of soft drinks in East Africa, and therefore not their arch-rival in business. The new findings confirmed that the majority of the population in East Africa who wanted to drink either Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola could not do so because none of the two products was available in most of the small towns across East Africa. This is how Coca-Cola came up with the idea of introducing big refrigerators which are stationed on verandas of shops with an intention to make their products readily available. Everyone who studied elementary economics or commerce will tell you that demand is need backed by capacity to buy, having money in brackets. This means that before the discovery, Coca-Cola managers and strategists were spending billions of money fighting a wrong enemy. This phenomenon of individuals and organizations fighting their counterparts whom they perceive as enemies is not restricted to business entities like Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. It is also common in politics and between political players, including those in big political parties like the National Resistance Movement, NRM, and even President Yoweri Museveni. These misguided missiles are common in politics, and they are responsible for the collapse of many governments, especially in Africa. In my book titled How Leaders Lose Power, which has been reproduced, I stated the following. In the 1960s, Obote wrongly perceived the then UPC Secretary General John Kakonge as his arch-rival, fighting to bring him down. He tricked Kakonge to forego a under lock and key. But his ill intentions were revealed later when he laughed after Kakonge's name missed on the nomination list of the 10 UPC members of parliament. Despite his indisputable contribution to UPC victory, surprisingly, the list included an Indian. Unlike Obote, Kakonge held a master's degree from India, and he was highly respected in the society. For example, when Kakonge went to West Africa during campaigns for independence, he slept in huts in West Nile. When Kakonge went to West Nile during campaigns for independence, he slept in huts with the ordinary people. This gesture earned him admiration from peasants. As is a practice with many African leaders, this public approval sent shivers down Obote's spine since he lacked such qualities. I, however, credit Obote for choosing to humiliate Kakonge instead of eliminating him. As Ugandans were celebrating the fruits of Uhuru, Kakonge was fleeing into exile. It is Paul Mwanga who solved this matter with honesty and surrendered his parliamentary seat to Kakonge in 1965. Milton Obote went ahead and removed Kakonge from the position of UPC Secretary General, replacing him with Grace Ibingira. It is the same Ibingira who, with several others, conspired against Obote in the 1966 crisis. Relying on the military, Obote survived the attempt. This victory, however, was short-lived, pending the 1971 military coup by Idi Amin, which resulted into the overthrow of Obote I government. Much like many African leaders in 1965, Obote perceived kings as enemies of his government, abolished kingdoms, and later installed a de facto single-party state. Obote failed to understand that the kingdoms were of feudalistic nature, but cherished by a majority of the population in Uganda. He once remarked that once a feudalistic society is pregnant with modernization, the midwife to assist it during delivery is a gun. If Obote had allowed other kingdoms to survive at the demise of Buganda Kingdom, his decision would have adversely affected the people in those kingdoms. Obote wanted to take advantage of the rivalry between Sir Edward Mutesa and his elder brother Prince Mawanda Chwa, who had lost the succession battle to Mutesa through manipulation by colonialists. The colonialists had urged that his mother was not officially married in church, despite the provision in the 1900 Buganda Agreement that vested powers to elect a new Kabaka in the kingdom, Lukiko. From incidents cited above, it must be noted that as Obote sought to consolidate his power, he wrongly believed that the problem was his political enemies, when actually these were artificial enemies. His real problem at that time his main problems at that time were mainly three. Number one, unlike in Zambia, where traditional leaders were appointed as executive members of Dr. Kenneth Kaunda's party, it was a different case in Uganda. When kingdoms were abolished in Uganda, traditional leaders were not given any role in government. The Kabaka of Buganda fled into exile, while Wilberforce Nadiope of Busoga, the first vice president of the independent Uganda, was thrown into Luzira prison. Palaces and kingdom assets were confiscated and seized by government. For example, Lubiri Palace became Malire Military Barracks. Malire is a Swahili word that can be translated to mean the loot that is Malire is a Luo word that can be translated to mean the loot that is shared after conquest. Much like other leaders we have already talked about, Obote devoted his efforts to non-existing enemies, and in 1971 he was overthrown by Idi Amin Dada, the VCDSO MCCBE, the self-proclaimed life president of Uganda. Number 2, Amin himself was preoccupied with the return of Obote. His host, the then president of Tanzania, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. In fact, Obote and Nyerere were not the real enemies of Idi Amin. Amin had been propelled into power by Israelis and the British. However, it was revealed that during the bloody coup that brought Amin, massive human rights abuses were committed unabated despite the support from the British. Appearing before a probe committee that was investigating cases of human rights abuse committed during the Amin government, one Acholi witness narrated an incident when Langi and Acholi soldiers were rounded up, confined into a military cell, and an army officer from West Nile showered them with bullets, killing them in masses. In spite of this, Idi Amin was accepted by all sectors of society. In his book, The Mustard Seed, President Yoweri Museveni admits that he had problems recruiting fighters from Ankole region because the residents could not trust him. He says that people took him to be Obote's agent. Otherwise, Amin enjoyed overwhelming support from the population during the first few years of his rule, just because his predecessor, Dr. Milton Obote, had antagonized a very influential institution in Uganda while trying to pursue a wrong enemy. Furthermore, Obote's stance on independence of African countries, including Namibia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, was also a big factor that led to his downfall. This is the reason why the then British Prime Minister had the audacity of telling the heads of state at the Commonwealth Conference meeting in Singapore that some of them who were making good speeches would not make it back to their countries. The Prime Minister was referring to Dr. Milton Obote. After taking over, Idi Amin was later hosted by the Queen of Britain at Birmingham Palace, and his official pilot was a colonel in the Israel Army. It is on record that Amin did not make any political reforms. He brought back Kabaka Mutesa's body in a gesture that opened a Pandora box on Obote's bad record amongst the Baganda. His intention was to use it against the remnants of Kabaka Ika group who were demanding for the restoration of kingdoms. On the economy, Amin wanted to employ Adolf Hitler's policy of grabbing property from foreigners and giving it to indigenous citizens. Hitler had grabbed property belonging to the Jews and given it to Germans. In a similar manner, Amin expelled Indians, which was actually political blunder because it could have easily turned into catastrophe if every country whose economy was dominated by foreigners was to adopt the same policy. This is why the economic war failed. The economy went into ruins and speculation on borders and smuggling of goods intensified. Constant skirmishes on the Tanzania-Uganda border gave Amin sleepless nights, and all efforts to harmonize the relationship between the two countries failed. Faced with this situation, Amin committed several other blunders. he embarked on a plan to Islamize Uganda and seeked allegiance from America and Europe to Arabs. This sparked hostility between his government and Christians. What followed was the brutality and extrajudicial killings in the country the country had never witnessed before. Amin's benchmen started killing everyone they perceived as an enemy of the state at their will. Nambole and Namamve area were quickly turned into a dumping site for dead bodies. This is the time when prominent Ugandans, including Chief Justice Benedicto Chiwanuka, met their death, while many others fled into exile. As we have observed, leaders often fight imaginary enemies, leaving their real enemies out. Instead of restoring peace and stopping the wanton killings that were going on in Uganda, Idi Amin invaded Tanzania in an act that eventually brought his downfall. I do not intend to waste time and space analyzing the Obote II regime because I have severally alluded to this in my books. However, to sum it up, Obote also wrongly believed that Yoweri Museveni was his enemy, which was not true. Museveni did not direct the UNRA government to kill people, and neither had he a hand in internal divisions within UPC, which eventually led to his downfall. Massacre in Acholi. A wealth of evidence against UPC Obote atrocities in Luelo Triangle. Since 1986, when the NRA stormed Kampala and took over power, there have been persistent accusations and counter-accusations as to who is responsible for the thousands of civilians who perished in this bloody struggle. The opponents of government have always put the blame on the NRA headed by President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. However, there is a wealth of evidence to implicate the then government troops, the Ugandan National Liberation Army, UNLA, and their commander-in-chief, the late Dr. Apollo Militon Obote. In this book, I have highlighted a number of incidents which can help the reader to make a sober judgment.